I was born in 1950 in Barrow-in-Furness. Yes, that makes me 72. In those days, Barrow-in-Furness was in Lancashire, and they changed the county boundaries sometime later in the 1970s, so Barrow-in-Furness is now in Cumbria. So when I was born in 1950, it was 5 years after the end of World War II, so there was a lot of bomb damage in Barrow-in-Furness, and there was still food rationing. So growing up in Barrow in the 1950s was a bit different from growing up today. I live now in the same place where I was born, but I left Barrow when I was 18 and I went to work in London. London was very exciting. It was totally different from Barrow-in-Furness, and getting on the tube to go to work was just so different from getting the bus and going to a place of work in Barrow. I used to love going on the big escalators, and I used to love to see the huge, colourful posters of the West End shows and places to work and things to wear and things to see. My place of work was near the Tower of London and London Bridge. I used to go there for my lunch, take my lunch and sit and see the place where Anne Boleyn was executed. I used to walk past Pudding Lane every day, which is where the Great Fire of London started. London had everything. It was very exciting and very different from how Barrow was. And plus, it was in the 1960s, so it was very exciting because we had a kind of cultural revolution then. We had music and fashion, and London was at the centre of everything. We had the start of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, and everything centred around London, so it was a very exciting place to be. But I used to love the contrast between London, the big city, and the small town. I used to love to come back home to Barrow, and I didn't like saying goodbye to my family when I went back to London. But what I do remember in those days was you could get a sleeper, so you could get on the train on a Sunday night at Barrow-in-Furness, and you'd have your own bedroom on the train and get into bed, and then it would arrive into Euston Station about 3 o'clock in the morning, and the waiter would bring you a cup of tea in the morning, and then you'd get dressed and go out and go straight to work. Well, my career was very interesting. I learnt a new language. I learnt Russian, and I learnt how to type in Russian, which meant I had to learn the Russian keyboard. So when I worked in London, it was quite a while before I realised exactly who I was working for. I was given the title of a Joint Technical Language Service linguist typist, and I used to go into the office and would have to check in at the reception and be escorted up to a room which was heavily locked and guarded. And after a while, and I'd been given this training at GCHQ in Cheltenham about security, about talking to people about my work, about trust, about suspicion, and all kinds of implications in the job. And then after a while, because I was so young and very naive, I realised when I had signed the Official Secrets Act that I was actually working for MI6, which is the organisation that uses information from abroad. It was a Cold War because people were not using weapons to fight, but they were spying on each other, and the West against Russia, Russia against the West, trying to find as much as possible they could about each other to assess any danger or risk that Russia was to the West and West was to Russia. And that was what my work was all about, and that was why I had to keep very quiet and I had to have a cover story about where I was working and what I was working, and I had to be very careful about who I spoke to. And in the end, it actually got a bit oppressive for myself. I found it not very easy to work in that kind of environment, although it did sound very glamorous and it did sound very exciting, so that's why I left. In Lancaster, I trained to be a teacher. So that would be at St Martin's College. From Lancaster, I went to Manchester, and I taught in a all-boys secondary school in Manchester, and I taught English, and I was there for 10 years. And next to the boys' school, there was a girls' school. So they were not taught in the same classroom, but they had adjoining schools. When I first went there, it was a very male-dominated staff room, and they had a snooker table in the staff room, and all the men would play snooker, and the women didn't. The female teachers weren't really interested in playing snooker, and at the very beginning, they weren't even allowed to be in the male staff room, and they had to go and have their coffee break in the female toilet. Now, well, I came back to Barrow and I carried on teaching for a while, and then I left teaching and I became a probation officer, which involved 2 years training and getting a degree. I still enjoy it when I see people that I've worked with or supervised on my caseload, and it's nice to see that the people who were in trouble at one point have turned their lives around, and they're settled and they're good and they're happy. I am a retired person, so I write stories and I write books and I work with a group of people, and sometimes I get a book published and that sells, but I don't really count that as an income. I like writing books about local history, and I like finding a story about somebody who lived a long time ago and then writing about it, but making it into my own story. I've enjoyed all my careers, linguist, typist, teacher, probation officer. I don't think I would make a big mistake doing any of those again.